Number 1. Halloween has unfortunately never been a big deal out here in Scotland, and that's always bummed me out because I love Halloween. But after this year, I think I'll be happy never celebrating it again. My street and the next street over have a lot of young kids who go out trick-or-treating. So while I was out shopping all day with my mom, we decided to pick up some sweets in case anyone came to our door. I had plans to go to the cinema to see Ouija with my boyfriend. So when I got home, I was getting myself ready to go out, and my mom was busy putting the shopping away. When the first load of kids came to the door, I was the one who had to answer it. There were children from our street, the next one over, and some I couldn't recognize as well as an adult at the end of the path. I'm assuming either a father or an older brother by their size, were dressed in all black and had some sort of mask covering their face. But it wasn't anything I recognized from a movie or anything else. They all told me their jokes, and I gave them their treats. They made their way back down the path and onto the next house. I was about to close the door when I noticed that the guy with the kids was still standing at the end of my path. He hadn't noticed, and he wasn't watching the children either. He was looking right at me. My skin started to crawl when I realized that he was just staring at me. I backed slowly into the house and watched him as he raised his hand and waved very slowly at me. I was about to call out to him when my mom came to the door to make sure I was all right. He took off in the opposite way from the children. He hadn't been with them at all. He left as soon as he realized that I wasn't home alone. I was completely freaked out, and I told my boyfriend all about it when he came to the house to pick me up. But I quickly forgot all about it once we were watching the movie. When I finally got home, it was getting really late, and trick-or-treating was well and truly over around here. When I got inside, my mother was just getting ready to take the dogs out for a walk so that they could do their last-minute business, and they would meet my dad on his way home from work. So I was going to be home alone. After my horrible encounter, I didn't really like being home alone, but it's worse on Halloween, and it always has been. I was home alone, and I grabbed some snacks, went up to my bedroom, and onto my computer so that I could do some of my writing, scroll through Tumblr, and listen to music. But after my first creepy encounter with the guy coming into my house and into my backyard, my dad bought a motion-censored light and attached it to the wall of our house right outside my window. Normally it will go off whenever a cat walks along our fence, but it will usually go off after a couple of minutes. I always know when the light has come on because it lights up my whole room, given where it's placed. And while I was sitting at my computer, the light came on. I ignored it at first, but I knew that it would go off soon. But 5 minutes passed, and it still hadn't gone off. So I decided to open my blinds to have a look outside and see what was going on. My stomach almost fell out of my ass when I looked out, and I saw the creep from hours before, just sitting on the fence, waving at my window to keep the light on. His waving slowed down suddenly when he spotted me, and it was all seriously creepy again. I didn't know what to do. I just got flashbacks from before. Luckily, I heard the front door open, and my parents coming into the house with the dogs. So I rushed down the stairs and started screaming at them about the guy on the fence. My father didn't question me. He just took the dogs and rushed through the house, threw the back door open, and ran outside. Then I heard him shouting, "Get the fuck out of here, you creep. I'm going to phone the police." My dad scared him off, but I convinced him not to call the police because I didn't want to relive the whole thing again. I just wanted to go to sleep and forget all about the entire night. So, to the creepy guy in the mask, waving at me from the end of my path and sitting on my fence, let's not meet. Number 2. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This bummed my brother and I out. We had already made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating, and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and just hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over because they, of course, still wanted to go trick-or-treating. So that left me home alone with my brother handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10 p.m., almost all the candy was gone. My brother and I decided that we'd just eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch, watching a scary movie, and stuffing ourselves with candy, when there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could be knocking on our door this late. I assumed that maybe it was just some late-night trick-or-treater, but even if that was the case, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or that we weren't home. So I assumed it might have been my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the peephole. There was a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face that I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater. He wasn't even wearing a costume, and he was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open the door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door, and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside. Definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy!" I shouted to him. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me, while gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket, and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder, what if he was armed? I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get the fuck away from my house, or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded, and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely off of our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. Although, we were a bit paranoid after this and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man, since he hadn't really tried to harm us. But now when I think back to this, I wish we had called the police, because maybe we would have been able to prevent a murder. You see, the next day, we found out that that elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, covered in blood. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't really do much with our information that we had given them, since we hadn't seen many details of his face. They went on the hunt for the man, but never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder, because I could have prevented it if I just called the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all is the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken what he wanted since her door was wide open. This just means he only wanted to kill. That was his one intention. He didn't want money or jewelry. He only had the urge to murder. Number 3. I used to own a small Halloween-themed shop. It was located downtown in a fairly small city, and unlike many businesses in town after Walmart's arrival, my store never really suffered when it came to customers. Of course, it was only open for the month of October. I sold a lot of unique things that you might find at other novelty stores in bigger cities, but for cheaper prices. I really didn't do it for profit, as much as I did it to celebrate the spooky Halloween spirit. I also loved to celebrate that spirit by doing my very best to scare the crap out of people every Halloween. One particular Halloween, my chosen victim was my buddy Alex. He was a pretty relaxed and calm guy most of the time, so he was the perfect person for the plan I had in mind. First, you should know that I always begin packing up my store every Halloween fairly early in the morning, as it was unlikely to get customers on the holiday itself. I told Alex that I had a much heavier merchandise that year, and I could use some help moving it all out. Not knowing what he was getting into, he accepted, and I told him to meet me at the shop around 10 at night sharp. As I said, he's a very relaxed and calm guy most of the time, but unfortunately for him, he had once told me about his irrational fear of clowns and how he could not function around them. So, naturally, my plan involved dressing up in a clown costume. When he arrived at shop, I would stand perfectly still like a statue, and once he realized he couldn't find me, he would then call me, at least most likely. But when my phone rang, it would be in the pocket of an apparent clown statue, and when he came over to investigate, I'd give him my best scare. Pretty simple plan, right? Everything was set in motion. I dressed up, stood near the back of the store, buy some boxes and other decorations, and waited for his arrival. A little after 10, he entered. It was very dark as I made the last-minute decision to cut the lights before he arrived. He called my name a few times, but of course I didn't respond. I heard him walking around a bit, looking around the shop for me. I could barely hold back laughter. After a bit more shuffling, I heard Alex speak in a defensive tone. "Not funny, dude." I looked around, but there was definitely no way he could see me right now. Even if I had twitched or anything, I continued to play dumb. "Come on, man," he repeated again, sounding angrier this time. That's not funny." Confused, I quietly adjusted a nearby stack of boxes so I could peer through a crack towards his voice. I couldn't make out his shape very well, but I knew for sure he was not looking in my direction. Suddenly, my phone rang. I heard Alex turn toward the sound instantly, and I froze, giddy with excitement that the plan might be working. But as he approached, I realized he wasn't holding his phone, and a wave of disappointment fell over me as I discovered my prank had been ruined by another caller. "Alright, fine, you got me," I announced shortly after the phone stopped ringing, taking off my mask and stepping out into the open. But Alex's face didn't look relieved. His face, twisted in such horror that I had never seen before. He began yelling and spouting panicky words, and I spent a few minutes trying to get him to calm down. He explained to me that when he entered, a man in a clown costume had stared at him and began walking slowly towards him. But when my phone rang, the man had dashed right out of the store. He had no idea that I was actually hiding in the back the whole time. I don't want to think about what would have happened if Alex had showed up late that night, or if my other buddy had never called during the prank.